We've examined the potential profile of a violent intruder and attempted to provide some framework for anticipating and possibly preempting attacks, understanding our threat environments, and doing everything possible to avoid a potential attack. When security training for the state was adopted more than 12 years ago, it neglected violent intruder response. I might argue this type of training could not be more relevant and necessary, and thankfully added in 2017. In fact, it is necessary for almost anyone, even if they are not a security professional. Nobody relishes the idea of learning survival techniques. When I attended grammar school several decades ago, school children practiced fire drills. Today, we instruct our children on what to do in the event of an active shooter. Church organizations have safety sessions about the topic. Businesses and employers frequently provide at least basic guidance on the subject matter. While this is still a sad necessity in life, we must never underestimate our desire to survive, at times despite some very serious odds. Our goal of training is much like it would be for medical emergencies or being inside a burning building. What can we do to help ourselves and others? My first foray into this subject will be a hopeful sentiment. These events are far from inevitable. Your chances of being involved in a violent intruder event are statistically unlikely. If you want some math, consider this. Over the past 23 years, we can roughly estimate about 12,000 to 15,000 people were present during such an event. This includes, unfortunately, casualty victims and deceased persons, but also others who escaped injury or death, or even others that were simply present or responded to the scene, such as protectors, being first responders, and even security personnel. And the last of that group being the absolute majority. The population of the United States is over 330 million people, and growing. Now, I'm not referring to all criminal activity or even incidents where a crime involves an assault or a weapon. Those numbers are obviously higher. But sticking with the definition of a violent intruder event, this is a good rough estimate. You may actually have a better chance of hitting the lottery and maybe getting struck by lightning on the same day, not to minimize this in any way. Media coverage of violent intruder incidents and the many examples of this and other criminal activity occurring almost anywhere do set us up for the mindset that they are somewhat inevitable. We train for the potential, being we must admit it does exist. So let's do that. Maybe even with the thought of never needing to use it, hopefully. A Greek philosopher once said, "Under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training." We have all heard accounts of people, most often first responders and security personnel, doing heroic things when there is a violent intruder event. And yes, they do happen, and these people are truly heroic. But when you speak with them in the aftermath, they will also tell you they often have fallen back onto their training. Yes, much of this comes down to character and even bravery, but training is the pathway to using both. So put aside for a moment imagining you need to be Superman or woman to react in these moments. Survival is an inherent trait in humans, and never discount your ability to fall back on it. During trainings, I have had students tell me they no longer plan to work in the security field as they felt it was too dangerous, or they never imagined they might be put in harm's way. I dare say that they probably should have done a little bit more research. Hopefully, your training has provided you with the ability to understand the potential threats that exist and showed you several methods to better manage them safely, including the option to retreat based on circumstances. There have also been students who tell me if there was an active shooter or a violent intruder event, they are not paid enough. Their life is too valuable and they would simply quit and go home. This is also your prerogative. What we all need to recognize is awful and dangerous events can happen pretty much anywhere at any time. Most people will understandably run from danger, but as we have seen, events don't always occur as we expect they might. What about an incident where you can't escape, where your options are limited? This can happen to Joe the citizen or Joe the security guard, anytime. Walking down Main Street, shopping in the market, going to your place of employment, during a doctor's appointment. So even if you're not on duty as a security person, the reality is everybody needs to be prepared. Moreover, if you have chosen to do security work, people still anticipate you to be a leader during an emergency. You're the one that they're going to see wearing the uniform. You know the nearest exits, the places to seek shelter. You're trained to provide medical attention. All of this will potentially be expected upon you. This training presentation was organized using several different references and adapted to provide a specific version for the security industry. There are other versions which have been used for citizens training. When I worked in the retail industry, I prepared a version for tenant employee training, for example. Sources for my training included a program developed by the Delaware State Police in training citizens on active shooter protocols by their DIAC unit. This is VIPER training, Violent Intruder Preparedness and Response Training. As previously referenced, I also used the ALERT program from Texas State University and also materials from the FBI Active Shooter Training and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Also included are some actual incident videos and training protocols from my prior security industry days. Our training will obviously be a classroom or table type version. It is not a tactical or law enforcement version, as this would require on-site activities. So now that we have established a game plan, so to speak, let me assure you this is not complicated and not intense training. In fact, most of it will be property specific, using some of the ideas as your template. These ideas are meant to be universal and adapted to your specific environments. Security personnel need to have a plan. While a violent intruder mass casualty incident will be chaotic, having some form of structure for you, your team, and the people you protect is essential. Practical planning also provides confidence to everybody involved, which is vital to survival. For years, my teams were familiar with the basics: run, hide, fight. But we reached a new level when we concentrated on our specific plan. Such techniques can be developed and incorporated into a formal security emergency plan, which, by the way, is a good starting point. Always review only currently available material on the property, as that will begin your guidance. Also remember to review such materials before an actual incident. The last thing you want to be doing is consulting the security emergency plan when the incident is unfolding, as it's probably too late. A security plan includes property maps, patrol plans, available resources and supplies, emergency contacts, and general guidance plans. They vary from property to property, so check out whatever might be available at your site. You can also plan a meeting of the minds, everybody on staff included. That's how I started off with my staff years ago. Perhaps using staffing as your template, there are maybe 5 guards that are on duty when a violent intruder incident occurs. What is their role and what are their priorities? You may have other situations where there's maybe only 1 or 2 security guards that are on duty at the time. What would your plan be with the staffing in that kind of a circumstance? In developing or integrating an emergency plan, security professionals need to understand response during the first 5 minutes of a violent intruder mass casualty incident, as this will be the time to focus on. Most likely, armed law enforcement will respond and take command of the scene during this time period or shortly after this time period. We've already stressed this when discussing emergency incident response, which is really not any different here. The 3 highest priorities are: get law enforcement to your scene, help whoever you can, including yourself, with either evacuating or seeking shelter. then assist law enforcement when they arrive and it's safe to do so. When you start your planning with the idea of thinking about staffing, it's very simple. Who is on duty, such as dispatchers, roving patrols, vehicle patrols. If an incident begins to unfold, you will move quickly by getting law enforcement and other first responder resources on their way. This can be done with a dispatcher or anyone who has access to a phone, really. But make sure someone is tasked with this duty. Also understand members of the public may be calling 911 at the same time, and systems can be overwhelmed during a major emergency. Having a property security person speak directly with 911 will be important, as specific details and locations can be explained. If the security personnel contacting 911 is also utilizing CCTV at the same time to provide real-time information, this is optimal. This may even require 2 or more security persons to operate cameras, maybe do public address emergency announcements, talk to 911, etc. Although they may be rare, consider any and all possibilities that other law enforcement or armed security persons that are either on your property already, or even if they are associated with somebody that's different from your security agency, or they work at a property tenant. Again, the goal is getting an armed person to the area so a potential attacker can be neutralized. You may recall a shooting in the Texas Mall in May of 2023, where a police officer on site for a different event actually neutralized the offender. So 911 is a definite call, but always keep in mind any appropriate personnel that might be in the area as well. After using all available avenues to notify and bring law enforcement or armed personnel to your site, you can move on to step 2. Should you be in the proximity of the threat, remember your personal safety, as you cannot help others should you become a victim. At the same time, you might be taking shelter or escaping or actively working to assist others. Keep in mind how you will be viewed as a leader again. People in an emergency will follow your direction, as you wear the uniform and presumably know your property. Seeking shelter or hiding or escaping, maybe running away, will be based on circumstances as to what is the best option. Are you far enough away from the attacker to escape? Is there available a viable hiding location? Run, hide, and fight is best demonstrated in the attached video of the same title, which should be viewed as part of this training section. When viewing this in terms of available staffing, if there are exterior patrols, this will depend on where the incident occurs. If it's inside, these exterior patrols should dismount and come inside to help evacuate and lead people to shelter. Your interior patrols, same priorities. Let's say you're the only person on duty alone, or you have limited personnel. You may need assistance from others, such as client employees or managers. If jobs such as getting 911 notified or sheltering or having them lead people to safety are possible, use whatever resources might be available to you. Other considerations might be safe meeting places for evacuated individuals once law enforcement does arrive, triaging the injured if there are any. Witnesses and victims should confer with law enforcement once the scene is secured, but they should only remain close to the property if they are able to do so in a safe location. There will be other steps in response, but again, here you're working on the basics, the initial response, getting to the point where those first responders are getting at your scene. Bear in mind also that step number 2 from the last slide was outlined, and it may not be able to occur in that sequence always. If you're in the middle of an event, you may immediately need to seek shelter or help others or simply move to escape, and this is all going to be depending on your circumstances. Planning is normally done with steps and a process in mind, 1, 2, and 3, A, B, and C. But during the violent intruder incident, the sequence is probably going to change. The more important part is to know what needs to be done depending on your ability and your circumstances, and you will most likely be doing a combination of all 3 priorities as well. You may not be able to initially call 911 right then and there. You may be working on actually escaping depending on what's going on. Your initial 3 steps can also be broken down into additional items or response measures, which will be property specific again, and they can assist as the incident might unfold as well. Again, knowing what resources are available beforehand is what's going to be important here. Patterns determined for criminal activity can allow law enforcement an advantage in predicting their occurrence. This normally does not hold true for terrorist and violent intruder incidents, as they are very random. Regardless, let's extract what we can from the data. According to alert statistics, the bulk of attacks happen between the hours of 7 a.m. and 4 p.m., 59% of the time. As the graphic shows, attacks do occur at all times of the day, though. As seen here, the plurality of incidents happen at places of business over 47% of the time. Places of business include factories, warehouses, retail locations, office spaces, and other areas. In 24% of incidents, they happened in public or outdoor spaces. Schools were attacked and represent 14% overall. These are events that are aggregated and include attacks on all types of educational facilities, including K through 12 and institutes of higher learning. Lastly, 14% of attacks happened at what we call other locations, with 19 occurring at houses of worship. Alert considers an event to be resolved when the attacker stopped actively trying to kill people. They split the resolution of the event into 2 broad time frames. These were whether the event was resolved before the police arrived on the scene or after. In the cases where they were able to make this determination, the attack was over before the police arrived about half of the time. For example, 297 times the event ended prior to law enforcement's arrival, and 223 times it ended after law enforcement's arrival. In the 297 events that ended before the police arrived, the attacker stopped the attack by killing himself on 76 occasions, or 15% of them, and simply left the scene in 143 cases, or 28% of the time. The potential victims at the attack site stopped the attacker themselves in 78 cases, or 15% of the time. In 59 of these cases, they physically subdued the attacker, and in 26 other cases, they actually shot the attacker. When the attack ended after law enforcement arrived, the attacker was more likely to be stopped by law enforcement than stopping him or herself. The attacker committed suicide in 46 incidents, 9% of the time, and surrendered 17 times, or 3% of the time. Law enforcement shot the attacker to resolve the event in 114 cases, or 22% of the time, and subdued the attacker using other methods 46 times, or 9%. This means that law enforcement directly stops the attacker in 31% of active attacks. Hopefully you had a chance to review the attached video, which is actual footage from an incident my security staff answered a few years back. As we have seen outlined and explained in this section, this is an outline of measures to consider should a violent intruder event occur. While the video showed an incident that was thankfully contained and did not result in any deaths, there certainly was potential, and one victim was seriously injured in that incident as well. There likely could have been more. Regardless, the video shows raw footage of security personnel with little other choice than to be able to take action. In a prior section, we spoke about being in that red zone when responding to incidents. And when incidents occur suddenly and you're required to act swiftly, sometimes in order to be able to survive. We call this the fight or flight zone, if you will. Should you be in the middle of a violent intruder incident or even in the area, you certainly can anticipate your adrenaline to kick in. During the incident, you may experience some other common sensory side effects that are associated with high stress levels. They might include tunnel vision. Your field of focus may narrow only to the most immediate threat, and you may lose peripheral details. In other words, you're only concentrating on what the actual threat is at that time. Audio exclusion would be you're not hearing any audible sounds, actually. And time deletion, events may tend to slow down or kind of move in slow motion, if you will. Of course, a lot of this is not reality. It's just the way that your body is perceiving it at the time. And you can even experience somewhat of an outer body experience where you feel that you're outside of your body and almost watching the event happen, if you will. And also possibly reduced motor skills. And this is your body kind of conserving energy for what you actually need to do if you need to run or fight in that kind of situation. But what happens in association with that is that your reduced efficiency in your fine motor skills, some of your other things that you're potentially able to normally do, like move your hands and so on and so forth. So just be aware of, the potential for some of these things. Again, when you're in that red zone, that fight or flight zone. As we also mentioned, emergency incidents frequently occur fast and unfold fast, often before security personnel can even be on the scene. And oftentimes the actual facts of the incidents are misunderstood or incorrectly reported. This occurs mainly when people incorrectly perceive sometimes an active shooter incident. This is video of an actual incident that was eventually reported as an active shooter incident. So what you're seeing there is this is video from a kiosk tenant. Again, this was an incident at the Christiana Mall. This was 4 days before Christmas in 2018. It was a Friday night. Again, we obtained this video the next day after the incident went down, but it clearly shows that an altercation had taken place, and they do occur in public facilities. We certainly had our share of them. But the metal sign holder knocked down by the offenders allowed persons who did not see the event but heard it to react differently by believing that that was an active shooter incident based on what they were hearing. They heard the metal sign detector hit the floor, and they mistakenly believed that that was gunshots that were going off. There were approximately 5,000 people in the center that night, and this started off a massive self-evacuation of the center. It was finally understood no actual shooting had taken place, as there were no telltale signs, no bullet casings, no smell of ammunition. Freshly fired ammunition has a distinct odor, especially indoors. There was also no victims, no blood, but there was plenty of chaos, that's for sure. So here are some tips on what to be aware of when you're evaluating an incident, particularly one that's being reported as an active shooter incident. Some of the things that have happened in other what we call panic incidents or false alerts, if you will. Trash cans or other objects being knocked to the ground, causing that loud bang, kind of simulating what a gunshot might sound like. Illegal discharge of fireworks can also sound like shots being fired, maybe somebody even yelling that without it actually happening. Maybe you have an accidental discharge of somebody who is carrying a firearm. A fight where a weapon might have been produced. This happens sometimes where a weapon actually was present. It actually wasn't fired. And taking a look at the video that we just seen in that incident, that's what we actually believe might have occurred in that incident as well, although we can never actually confirm that. And also hammers and other devices used maybe during a robbery when it's breaking glass in the display, like the popping sound or anything else like that. That also can simulate gunshots as well. Remember, until it's actually known for certain that an incident is different from what it's being first reported as, your first priority is everybody's safety. Don't deviate from evacuating or taking any other measures unless and until the scene is definitely declared to be something different than what it was initially reported as.